So we are week 3 into week 4 of the sermon series from finances to romances. And I just make this warning every week before we start, just in case. This is PG-13, okay? Pastoral guidance suggested. And so I want to just warn everyone here that we're going to talk about some mature subject matter, and it's mostly sex. So we're looking at the story of Joseph through the lens of finances and romances. And we're going to recap where we are to get us up to speed. So this is the last segment in the part about Joseph. Next week will be something different, but still in the same series. So for now, where we're at is Joseph is one of 12 brothers. And his older 10 brothers hate him. And they end up selling him to slave traders into Egypt. He ends up working for someone whose wife continuously puts pressure on him to have sex with her. And he keeps refusing, but he still winds up in jail for a crime he did not commit, and that was rape. So while he's in jail for a while, 2 of the king's servants, who is Pharaoh, if I say king, I mean Pharaoh in the story, but the Pharaoh's servants show up in prison. So they angered the Pharaoh and they wind up in prison for a minute. And so he sees them, and one day they both have really disturbing, troubling dreams. These dreams leave them shaken and visibly disturbed. So Joseph says, hey, what's up? Tell me your dreams. And he correctly interprets both of their dreams, okay? And one of the servants is going to be restored back to the palace in just a few days. So Joseph says, remember me when you get out. And naturally, what happened? He forgot him. So the servant forgot about Joseph for about 2 years until the Pharaoh has some disturbing dreams. And he calls all of his astrologers and magicians and everybody that's anybody in Egypt's culture to decipher what these dreams meant. And then the servant remembered, oh yeah, that's right. Joseph, there's a dude in jail that can probably interpret your dreams. So Joseph is brought from the prison, and he listens to the Pharaoh's dream. The Pharaoh tells him the dream. Joseph, through God's help, is able to interpret this dream, and it immediately resonates with Pharaoh. The Pharaoh says, that's it. That's it. And so the dream essentially interpreted is this. There's going to be 7 years of bountiful harvest, good crops. Okay, it's going to rain the right amount. The sunlight's going to be out. It's going to be the right amount, and you're going to have an abundance of crops and harvest. But after those 7 years, we're going to have extreme famine. And so when he tells the Pharaoh this, the Pharaoh goes, well, I can think of no one more wise and discerning than you to be in charge of all this. So I hereby put you second in command for carrying out this dream of Pharaoh's. And so Joseph makes the most out of his situation. He gets married to an Egyptian woman there, and he has 2 boys. And he starts implementing the plan from Pharaoh's dream. And the years of good crops go by. So remember, there was going to be 7 years of good crops. And it says this in Genesis 41:53. It says, the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. Okay, so let's do a little math here, a little Bible study. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, when Joseph was hauled off to Egypt, when he was sold into slavery, he was 17. Okay, and then when Pharaoh appointed him second in command, in Genesis chapter 41, verse 46, he was 30. And so now this verse says that 7 years of abundance came to an end. So how old is he roughly? 37. Good job, kids. Good job. So now this is, the good times have ended. So these good harvests. So now we're into the famine. And so Joseph, we left off him being put second in command last week, and him that was where we left off right there. So he was appointed this. Now 7 years have transpired. So that's where we pick up the story from last week. And so Joseph, now that we're into the famine, and there's 7 years of famine, he could be into his 40s by now, but he's busy working for someone else's dream. Does that sound familiar? remember, this was not Joseph's dream. This is the Pharaoh's dream. In Genesis chapter 37, Joseph has a dream, and he sees in his dream his brothers are serving him. Essentially, they're bowing to him. So let your minds think right now. If you had all of the power of Egypt bestowed on you, don't you think that you could return home and force your brothers to bow to you? That was Joseph's dream. Joseph could force his dream to happen. So in my life, when I push things when they're not ready, or I get ahead of God because he's just too slow, I usually end up very disappointed, or I end up disappointing other people. And so I want to let you know how much more rewarding it is when God fulfills your dreams as you remain faithful where you are. You don't get antsy. You don't get sidetracked financially, and you don't push things romantically that shouldn't be. And so we're now well into the famine here, and it's affecting not just Egypt, but the whole area of this world, even Joseph's homeland. In Genesis 41:57, it said, all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. But Joseph doesn't have time to worry about forcing his dreams to happen because he's placed his dreams on hold to help fulfill the Pharaoh's dream. Okay? Joseph didn't go home when he heard news of the famine. In fact, he was the very first person to know what was going to happen. The Pharaoh didn't even know his own dream. But when Joseph heard it, he was the first person to know. But we know from the scriptures here that Joseph didn't hurry home when he heard news of the famine. He didn't abandon his post. Now, the Bible doesn't say why, but maybe he knew that his homeland didn't have the resources to hold on to crops for that long anyway. Maybe his best chance was to stay put and to use the resources and position that he had and manpower of Egypt to undertake the task of saving up all of these crops, right? We're talking about the land where manpower built pyramids, okay? That wasn't happening in his homeland. Or maybe he sent messengers to all of the neighboring countries when this first happened. And he said, send messengers everywhere around. Tell them to store up extra crops. But would they have listened? Hey, there's a messenger here from Egypt. Egypt? We don't even like Egypt. Yeah, the guy says they told us to store up extra. Don't eat everything. Save a little. Just set some aside. Because God told Pharaoh that there's going to be a famine. So just go ahead and save a lot of food in a big area, right? Do you see suspicion? Would they have listened if he had sent people? Now, we don't know all the reasons, but we do know this. Joseph didn't hijack his dream before it was time. Have you placed your dreams on hold for someone else's, like Joseph? Almost every parent, to some degree, has done this. Right, moms and dads? Right? You know what this looks like. And sometimes in our culture now, grandparents are putting their dreams aside to raise grandkids. My uncle is 69 and he has elementary age grandkids that he's raising. That's putting a dream on hold. Now, the Bible says that God has a plan for your life. Jeremiah 29:11 is a great verse. And if you want, you could call it God's dream for your life. His plans are good, to not harm you, to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope. But are you willing to allow God's plan? Are you willing to follow God's dream for your life? Or are you only interested in hijacking your dreams and forcing them to happen before their time? See, lots of people, they try to force their dreams before the time for them to happen. And I just want you to see how Joseph could have been tempted to do that. Can you see how Joseph could have been tempted to do that? Imagine right now that you've just been entrusted with all the power of one of the most powerful countries in the world. And you could go back home and you can force those brothers to bow to you. That was Joseph's dream. So let me shift gears real quick and ask you a few questions here. So, if I rob a bank on Monday, but I bring all of the money back on Friday, have I broken the law? Okay, that's a very reassuring yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's change the scenario. Let's say I'm walking, by and I see that the armed guard has misplaced a bag of money. There are no cameras and no people. So I grab this bag of money, I put it in my car, I race home, and instead of bringing all of it back on Friday, I decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pay off my car loan and a couple of credit cards, and as soon as all the money is back in this bag, then I'm going to go place it back at the bank where I found it. Have I broken the law? Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm worried about you, but I knew you'd come through. Okay. How about this? I see the money is misplaced by the armed guard. I see there's no cameras or people. I take it. I put it in my car. I drive straight home. Nobody gets me. But then I say, you know what? I'm going to take it back. So now I'm on my way back to the bank to return this money. But I get pulled over. Okay? Have I broken the law? Yes. Okay? But I was taking it back. Does it matter? No. Okay, what if I tell the police when they stop me that I really, really, really needed the money? Okay, would that change anything? No. Okay, everybody give yourselves a clap right now. Congratulate yourselves. You know what that means? You have good logic skills and good moral, a good moral reasoning here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch subjects, and I'm going to apply this to a different category, and we'll see what happens, because once I change it to this category, all of our logic goes out the window. And the category is sex. So, that's because when we deal with sex, we're not thinking logically. We're thinking sexually. Sex releases chemicals in your brain that literally reduce stress and make you feel like everything's okay, everything's right. And drugs do the same thing unnaturally. They release some of the same chemicals in your brain. And that's why you see people on drugs doing crazy, irrational things that are illogical, okay? So your roof could be leaking. Your car could be in the shop. Your rent could be late. Your health could be poor. Any number of things could be going on in your life, but when sexual activity is happening, all of that drifts away. All of it drifts away. That part of your mind is shut off. And so in the area of sex, we are robbing the bank. We've been breaking the law, but we tell ourselves we're going to make it right. You know why I can steal this money and enjoy it and use it? Because I'm going to pay it all back. It's going to be legal. It's just a matter of paperwork, really. If I just go to the bank and apply for a loan, I'll have the paperwork that allows me to enjoy all this money that I've stole. Just a piece of paper. That's the only thing that's holding this thing up. And because we're gonna make it right, we're gonna pay it back, right? We just keep going on and on, breaking the law day after day, or should I say night after night. Now that position that I mentioned, many people are putting themselves in that position. And I tell you what, it isn't any position I want to be in when God pulls me over. It's no position I would want to be in. But we rationalize away what God has said not to do. In fact, I don't even think we rationalize it away. We just shut that part of our mind off that thinks logically through all of the money questions, but illogically when it's applied to sex. In Genesis chapter 39:9, Potiphar's wife is seducing him over and over and over, and he's resisting. And so he says this, and there's two underlined words that I hope we can all say here this morning. So she says, point blank, there's no innuendo, no double entendre, have sex with me, come to bed with me. This isn't, hey, do you want to have a dinner or a meal? There was no escaping what she wanted. And he says this, there's two underlined words here. How then could I do such a thing and sin against God? So let's do another little Bible study here. Joseph dies in Egypt. He never leaves Egypt. Now this is way before he dies, okay? So after Joseph dies in Egypt, Pharaoh, after succeeding Pharaoh, begins to forget what Joseph and his family did for them. And so eventually, Joseph's family, who all moved to Egypt, become enslaved for around 400 years. And then a man named Moses finally leads a revolt, and all of Joseph's family is exited out of Egypt, and now they're in the desert, okay? Now, when Moses is out in the desert, so the Exodus happens, for 40 years they're crossing the desert. So for 400 years after Joseph dies, they're in slavery. And there's 40 years in the wilderness there. And this verse here that he says, he's still a pretty much young man. So what am I saying here is Moses is out in the desert and God gives him the 10 commandments. And so the verse that I'm going to read to you is at least 450 years after this verse. And it simply says this: you shall not commit adultery. It's always been wrong, and it always will be wrong, no matter what. No matter what the culture thinks, no matter how glamorous and glorious Hollywood portrays it as, no matter what the popular opinion is. Popular opinion has yet to make anything morally right. Slavery was a popular opinion. Annihilating Jews in Germany was a popular opinion. Popular opinions come and go, but the word of the Lord stands forever. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 25. Even people who don't read the Bible understand that this is wrong because they feel it. They feel it. Now, Genesis 39:9, that Joseph said this 450 years before God put this in writing. Okay? Moses wrote the book of the Genesis after the fact. But Joseph felt it. He knew. He knew. And even people who deny God's existence still feel that. Romans chapter 2 talks about that. So I want to challenge Christians. I want to challenge people who say they believe in Jesus. Because it says if you believe in Jesus, you will be saved. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved. Acts 16:31. If you really believe what Jesus says, then you'll be saved. But if you don't believe what he says, will you be saved? Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey me. John 14:15. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that this is an easy to follow command. This ain't even easy to preach, okay? Because I like to be liked. I like to be liked. I'm a human. I don't know a lot of people who enjoy being despised or hated, okay? This is why peer pressure and popular opinion are so powerful in our culture. But I know this, if everyone left, if I had to preach a message that I know God wants me to preach and everybody left next week, nobody showed up but me and Michelle, it'd be okay. I'd have to find a new job. But that's okay. That's okay because I know that at the end of the day that I did what God wanted me to do. And I answer to God first and then to all of you. Does that make sense? I'm not your enemy. I'm no one's enemy. In fact, I want you all to succeed. I want you to succeed. So if you're watching online, or maybe you're coming to terms with what Christianity is all about, this is like, oh, can you believe it? Can you believe it? I was just enjoying the last few messages from this guy. I watched a few videos online, and he's so articulate, and he's so smart. Thank you, imaginary person. And now here he goes. Exactly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Let me tell you something. Pastors don't like to give these types of messages. But I know how the world thinks. They think that the church enjoys being jerks. They think that somehow the worse that we can make you feel, the better we feel about ourselves. Let me tell you something. That's not true. It's just not true. I feel terrible. Terrible. But I love you guys, and I've known many people here for over a decade. I love all of you, and I want you to succeed. And this is a heart issue. And the question is your heart committed to the God that created you? Is it? So I'm going to return to Joseph in a moment, but one more thought. I want you to think about this. The marriage ceremony that we have, okay, it's a sacred thing, which is why it's done in church before the presence of God and these witnesses, if you've been to a ceremony or two. And it's been in church forever and a day. Why is that? Why did you go to a wedding, or why did you invite people to your wedding, right? To celebrate? Yes, but they're there to witness you making vows to each other, right? You even had, some of you, if you were like a maid of honor or a best man, you had to sign a document saying that you witnessed them making those vows publicly to each other. Why? Why do we do that? Because you want them to be accountable, right? You want this couple that's getting married to be accountable, and they want to be accountable to anyone that sees them out in life. You made the pledge publicly. And our culture has placed everything on the reception and very little on the ceremony. What are we going to eat? Where are we going to have it at? Are we going to do a DJ? Are we going to do one of those photo things? Those are really happening right now, right? That's why there's 200 people at the reception and 38 people at the ceremony. Don't you hijack your dream to live happily ever after by having sex before you're married. It messes everything up. It takes relationships that probably shouldn't have went anywhere into places they shouldn't have gone. And so many people in our culture have hijacked this dream to live happily ever after. They want to do it their way, not God's way, and they can't understand why it's not working. They're on to their next sexual partner, hoping that this new partner will fulfill the dreams that they keep hijacking. So back to Joseph's story. In Genesis chapter 42, verses 1 through 4, his brothers show up for food in Egypt because they're starving. And so they come before the governor of the land, who is Joseph, and they bow to him. So they all bow to Joseph, who they think is just the governor of Egypt. See, because Joseph's wearing Egyptian clothing. Joseph is speaking a new, different language than what they knew. And Pharaoh even gave him a different name when people are calling him Zaphenath-Paneah. Okay? Doesn't have a very strong ring to it, right? What did he say about going to Panera? So Joseph has a different name. He's dressed as an Egyptian, speaking a different language, and his 10 older brothers show up starving for food. So Genesis chapter 42, verse 5 through 16, Joseph interrogates his brothers. Now, the Bible doesn't say exactly why, but I think you can see why, if you read this story, why he was doing this. Because his 10 older brothers show up, but where is Benjamin, and is his dad still alive after 20 years? And he can't say that right off the bat. So he interrogates them a little bit to get information about where his little brother is. And so it says this, he put them all in custody for 3 days. So now he has his 10 older brothers locked up. Oh, man. Think of all the ways that Joseph could exact revenge on his brothers. Remember, we talked about rubbing your hands together, right? The gears of vengeance. This is what it sounds like, right? Joseph's no more hand wringing. It's time for hand rubbing, right? So imagine all the things that would race through your mind if you were in Joseph's position. Your 10 older brothers, right, are now locked up. This is an opportunity for ultimate vigilante justice, right? Ultimate. Now, if resisting Potiphar's wife was a pivotal moment in his life that we talked about, right, in week 1, that was a pivotal moment in his life, because how many millions of people do we see that are tempted like that and go that way? If Joseph had gone that way, I'm sure they would have carried out a relationship for a while until somebody found out about it. And then Joseph's over. End of story. So if that was a pivotal moment, his encounter with Potiphar's wife, this is a much more monumentally pivotal moment in Joseph's life. Why? Because your 10 older brothers, all heartless jerks, are now starving and have traveled to Egypt for food. I tell you what, our sinful nature, there's nothing better than hearing somebody that's wronged you is doing terrible. That's your sinful nature. Oh, wait, they're not doing good? Right? Hey, do you remember so-and-so, your old boss that fired you? Yeah, what about him? He got fired. Oh, that's so terrible. It couldn't have happened to a nicer person. I'm sad. Have you ever heard anything like that? No, nothing even close, because that's not who our sinful nature is. It's called schadenfreude, sour grapes. We love to hear that people who have wronged us are doing terrible. So his brothers are in jail. Imagine all the things that are going to race through your mind. They threw me in a pit with no food and no water. And then they ate lunch while I was yelling for help, screaming, pleading with them. And they came back not to pull me out to save me, but to sell me to slave traders. How much money did you get? How much? I want it all back. I want my life back. 20 years you guys took from me. Put yourself in Joseph's spot. It's not easy. And your spot might not be easy either. This could be the end. See, Joseph slaughters his brothers, right? Joseph marries an Egyptian woman. All of his family back home die in a famine. End of story. End of story. So Joseph decides to let 9 of his brothers go back home. And he keeps one there as a retainer, like a safety, because he wants to see his little brother. He wants to know that he's alive and that these guys aren't lying to him about him. So they go home, convince their dad, we got to take Benjamin back. This guy is serious, you know. So when he gets there, when Benjamin arrives, chapter 43, verse 40, Joseph has to leave and bawls his eyes out. He cries uncontrollably because that kid was a little kid when he left, and now it's 20 years later. All of his life has gone by. And so when you get to chapter 44, we're just going to summarize it. But when I read chapter 44, when you first read it, it seems like Joseph's like playing games. He's looking for ways for them to bow to him again. Now remember, they bowed to him first. He did not elicit this bow. They bowed to him and said they needed food the first time they came. So now Joseph's saying all these different things, and now they're bowing again and bowing again. It looks like, oh, Joseph's just trying to relive this dream. He's trying to make this happen, in his head. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think what chapter 44, if you read this story, is Joseph testing them to see if his older brothers have changed since that day that they sold him into slavery. Because all the brothers are going to pay for their food, so now they're all out again, and they load up their food and head back home. But what does Joseph do in chapter 44? He plants silver in Benjamin's bag, and then he sends his people to go chase them down. And they chase them down and say, stop, one of you stole. And whoever stole, they will be our slave. So all the brothers take all their bags down, open them up one by one. And lo and behold, it's in Benjamin, their baby brother's bag. And they know that their dad cannot take it. He said in earlier verses that my heart can't take that if something happens to him. So out of all the brothers, okay, who's the brother that speaks up? If you read, it's Judah. Why is that significant? Because in chapter 37, verse 26, when he was in the hole, it was Judah's idea to sell him into slavery. And now here is Judah saying, don't take him, take me instead. Sacrificing his own life for his little brother. Judah has changed, right? Now Joseph would have never known that his brothers were truly sorry for what they did if, one, when Joseph got power, he immediately went back home and made them bow. See, when you have a group of mercenaries show up in a house, and they're going to, oh, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. How does he know that they're truly sorry if he had forced that dream? He would have never known that. Number two, he would have never known that his brothers were truly sorry for what they did if he, when they were in jail, all 10 of them, just sold them off into slavery after he arrested them. He would have never known that they truly were a family again. And so God's dream for humanity would have never unfolded if Joseph had hijacked his dreams before their time. It wouldn't have happened. And so the rest of the story plays out here through to Genesis chapter 50. And basically, Joseph ends up saving his entire family from famine. And he goes and fetches the rest of them. Dad, nephews, nieces, wives, everybody comes back to Egypt to ride out this famine. And they don't just ride it out, they kind of ride it out in style. And after all is said and done of Joseph, only someone truly faithful and without resentment can say this at the end of this tale. He says, what you intended to harm me. He's talking to his brothers now. He says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. For good. So many lives were saved because Joseph saved himself for a higher purpose. So, as I close in the story of Joseph here in part 3 of 4, there's one more session. It's not about Joseph, but it is about sex. So one more week. But as I close this story out, I want to let you know that we look at Joseph's life. He took all the right steps of where God wanted him to be. And even when people wronged him and caused him painful setbacks, he still was faithful. So I look at Joseph's story in a whole, and I say this: how you get something matters. And let me explain. If after I dismiss all of you wonderful people this morning, and you walk out, and then I'm walking out, and one of you should come back up to me and say, Pastor Rusty, I want you to have this. It's $10,000. And I take it, and I say, thank you. Is it for me? Yes. There's so many things I could do with this, so many things I could fix. Thank you so much. And you stand there proud after giving me the money and you say, you're welcome. I stole it. The first thing I would say to you is, why did you tell me that? Don't tell me that. The second thing I would say to you is, I can't keep it. I can't take it. Because how you got something matters. How you got where you got. What are you getting? There's nothing wrong with money. 1 Timothy 6:10 says only the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money is a good thing. You could do lots of good stuff with money, right? I shouldn't even say it's a good thing. It's a neutral thing. You can do good and bad. There's nothing wrong with money. And there most assuredly is nothing wrong with this creation that God invented called sex. But how are you getting them? How are you getting it? Did you get it by staying faithful to God and His commands? Then be blessed. Or are you getting it by stealing from God and hijacking His dreams for you? That's it. Would you close your eyes and bow your head? We're going to pray.